Hello and welcome back to Threads of Fate. I am your host, Kira Ryberg, and today we are here with the November forecast for 2025. And this month has a lot of retrograde action, whether it's planet stationing retrograde, planets going direct. There's going to be a lot of starts, stops, returns, and I'm excited to get into it with all of you. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. And if you have been listening and are a fan of the show, then make sure you are subscribed on YouTube, leave a little comment, leave a review, and enjoy the podcast. All right, so the month kicks off on November 4th when Mars enters Sagittarius. Now, this is going to be a change of pace because Mars has been moving through Scorpio, which is a sign of Mars's nocturnal domicile, for about the last 6 weeks. And now Mars is going to be changing its expression from a nocturnal sign to a diurnal sign. So Scorpio is a little bit more plotting, it's a little bit more secretive. It likes to move in a much more stealthy way. And when Mars is in a diurnal sign, and in particular in Sagittarius, Mars is going to operate in a little bit more of a visible, expressive way. So you can expect for a lot of the actions that people are taking to start coming to the surface a little bit more. Conflict, for example, is going to be easier to come by instead of pushing it down, instead of suppressing it. We are going to be a lot more likely to just say it how it is, even if that pisses some people off. Now, Mars is also going to be losing dignity because Mars is going from the sign of its domicile into a sign where it does not have much dignity at all, save for a bound and a decan. So, this is going to be a change of pace for people who are in a perfection year that is ruled by Mars. So, if you're in a Scorpio perfection year or an Aries perfection year, then this is going to feel a little bit like a shift away from being really resourced, really energized, and into a place where you might be struggling a little bit more with those types of characteristics. Now, that's not to say it's a bad shift by any means, it's just different, right? This is Mars in a sign where he is not as resourced, where he is not as comfortable, but it is a sign where Mars fights for his beliefs, right? In Sagittarius, we are always seeking the greater meaning to something, the greater why behind our actions and motivations. And so this is a Mars that is fueled by principle, fueled by philosophy, and fueled by faith. So we're going to probably see a lot more of an ability to take action around things that feel really critical and important to us in our lives. And Mars is also going to be moving through the Sagittarius parts of our chart for a while, which is going to bring a more intense focus to that part of our charts. For those of us who are born during the daytime, that means that Mars is going to be wreaking a little bit more havoc in the Sagittarius part of our lives. And for people who are born during the nighttime, this is going to feel like an opportunity to really lay some constructive groundwork in that part of your chart. But because Mars is still a malefic planet, it is tending to be on a little bit more of a difficult side of things. So wherever Mars is transiting through, for example, you can think about what you just went through in Scorpio. I know for me, Mars was going through my sixth house, and I have a day chart, so Mars is a little bit more difficult. Sixth house is where we find illnesses and injuries, and I was very, very sick as a product of my daughter starting daycare. So you think about the areas of life that Mars has been moving through in recent times, and that can give you a little bit of context for the types of difficulties that you are going to experience in a new part of your chart for the next 6 weeks. Now, Mars is a little bit more lighthearted in Sagittarius, a little bit more passionate and a little bit more exuberant and optimistic because this is still Jupiter's sign. We're going to get a little bit of a boost from November 18th to December 1st when moves through his own decan, which is really about the story of listening to your instincts, about protecting what is personal and private and sacred, around caretaking through our actions, severing what isn't working, particularly in our connections or with our physical body, and fighting for the innocent. So we're going to get a little bit of a boost when Mars moves through that part of Sagittarius because that is a story that Mars has co-wrote alongside the moon, which is going to be a little bit of a kind of life raft in this greater transit to hold on to. Now, one of the things about Mars moving into Sagittarius that is not so pleasant is the fact that it starts off the sign-based square with Saturn. And this is going to heighten tension and conflict between the Sagittarius part of our charts and the Pisces parts of our charts. This is going to come to a head when the square goes exact in December. But the tension is going to start mounting now. So, really start to think about the areas of life that Sagittarius and Pisces correspond with in your chart and consider where might you run into burnout with these topics, which is a very common Mars Saturn signifier. Mars wants to do shit in Sagittarius. Mars wants to get stuff done. And Saturn is really trying to build solid foundations in Pisces by slowing down, going at a methodical and intuitive pace, listening to the body, right? And at this rate, we're going to run into some tension between our intuition and our instinct, our feeling versus our body. Mars likes to go really fast, Saturn likes to go really slow. So when they're squaring, we can run into conflict with something that is trying to speed up and another thing that is trying to slow down. Saturn is essentially putting the brakes on Mars, and Mars does not like to have the brakes put on him, usually ever, right? Mars is a planet of go, 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 and Saturn is a planet of slow, slow, slow. And when you get those two, we can run into almost this whiplash kind of feeling with the speed that we are moving at. So think about the activity that is going to be really coming up in the Sag part of your chart and consider the fact that you are going to run into some limitations with that there are going to be restraints placed on the activities that you are trying to make happen in the Sagittarius part of your chart. And know that Mars Saturn stuff can often feel like we are highlighting their disagreements when they're in a square, and that can really manifest as difficulties in speed and pacing, like we talked about. But because these two are malefic planets, it also tends to be an aspect that is a little bit harder for us to navigate. And the thing about the malefics is that they are not necessarily planets that care about our well-being or care about making things feel easy and comfortable for us. So the start of this square is going to be start of some tension and some conflict and some difficulty arising in your life. And this is going to be particularly pronounced for mutable placements because this is going to be happening in Sagittarius and Pisces. We're going to talk more about that square next month. So let's move ahead to November 5th, where we get the full moon at 13 degrees of Taurus. Now, I am actually really happy that Mars moves into Sagittarius the day before because that means this full moon does not oppose Mars. So we can all rejoice about that one. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can look at this full moon together and see what is going on here. All right, so we have the sun conjunct this fixed star Alphecca at 12 degrees, which is a really beautiful star about connection and friendship and creativity and almost like this really beautiful energy that I think softens the fact that the sun is in Scorpio. I know when I'm doing elections and I have to use Scorpio, I almost always try to get the placement conjunct Alphecca, who sits at 12 degrees, because it's a much softer part of Scorpio. And so we might be a little bit more attuned to focus on relationships during this full moon, along with realizing that the moon, when this goes exact, is going to be conjunct the fixed star Menkar. And that is the sea monster. It is kind of about wading into the waters of the collective unconscious. And I know Bernadette Brady talks about how it can reveal things that were hidden. And so, as we're navigating the story, I would expect that we are going to see things come to light around our relationships, in particular, around our friendships, around the things that bring us pleasure and desire. And we are also doing the story of the second decans of both Scorpio and Taurus during this lunation. Now, in the second decan of Scorpio, we see this desire to merge with something, to really pour our all into it, whether it's a person or whether it's a project. And because the sun is in the bounds of Mercury, normally that is going to manifest more as a project, a field of study, something that stimulates the mind rather than a connection with another person, although it certainly can show up that way for some people. Now, with the moon in the second decan of Taurus, there can be this tendency to need to find the right pacing, find the right way to communicate. And so we are going to be seeing these two planets highlight this story of wanting to connect and merge and create, and also revealing certain things that were hidden or lurking beneath the surface that can influence the way that some of this stuff comes about. Now, you're going to want to think about wherever Scorpio and Taurus is in your own chart, because that is really going to influence the ways that this full moon shows up for you, right? It brings things to a climax in that part of your chart, and it is going to cast a light in particular on what is living in Taurus and what is lurking underneath the surface there that needs to be addressed through our relationships, through our commitments, and through the different things that we are currently connecting with and wanting to create and study and go deeper with, because that is essentially what we do in that second decan of Scorpio, which is co-ruled by the Sun and Jupiter. So luckily, the Sun has a little bit of dignity here, which is really nice. And then the moon is also in a decan that she co-rules and the sign of her exaltation. Now, the moon is averse to Venus, who is the ruler of Libra. So she's kind of on her own during this lunation, right? And the moon in Taurus is very concerned with comfort, with security, with reliability and stability. And full moons can feel a little destabilizing because they are bringing things to a head, right? And that is often going to be a marker of a time of change. And so you're going to want to think about what you're rooted into, what feels desirable and pleasure filled for you right now, and what is challenging your ability to connect with that. Where are you potentially overdoing it, and where are you potentially underdoing it? Because the second decan of Taurus is one about finding the right rhythm and finding the right pace. And if you haven't been able to do that in the Taurus and Scorpio parts of your chart, this full moon is going to highlight that for you. Now, the sun is ruled by this Mars, who, as we just talked about, is right over here in Sagittarius, hanging out with Mercury. So there can be, if you are addressing especially relationship themes in your life, right, an ability to speak in a very direct manner that can be a little bit more conflictual. And so think about the way that you're saying things, think about the way that you're wording things. This is a little bit more, I'm just going to say it how I want to say it without thinking really through how that might come across and be received by another person. And because Mercury is stationing retrograde, which we'll talk about very shortly here, you're going to be revisiting a lot of the themes that come up around this full moon because of that conjunction with Mars and Mars being in charge of the sun in this chart. So that is kind of the big part of this lunation, is having the climax or a story being revealed in the Taurus and Scorpio part of your chart, especially as it relates to what you want to create, what you want to connect with, and realizing that as you are having conversations around these with other people or non-humans alike, that you might say things in a way that you are not super proud of after the fact. So go into this full moon with your eyes wide open and be a little bit conscious around the way you word things. And I think you're going to be much happier with the outcome. We've got some support from Jupiter in Cancer, who is going to be sextiling this full moon and trining the sun in Scorpio. So that does help to soften and add a little bit more of a nourishing and comforting kind of energy to things. So as far as full moons go, I don't hate this one. I think it's actually kind of cute. I just think that there's a potential for things that we're not expecting to be brought to light, and that might cause us to, have to navigate some topics that feel a little bit pokier. But all that being said, I think it's a full moon that is not necessarily going to be one to write home about too much for most of us. But if you've got fixed placements around 13 degrees, so from 11 to let's say 16 degrees of fixed signs, this one will be a little bit more significant for you. All right. Now on November 6th, we have Venus entering Scorpio, which is going to be a major change of pace because similarly to Mars leaving the sign of his domicile, Venus will also be leaving the sign of her domicile. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really enjoying Venus in Libra right now, so I will be quite sad to see her go. It's been really nice to have her in the sign of her domicile and be able to connect with the relational and creative sides of life with a little bit more ease. And when Venus moves into Scorpio, that's going to shift because not only is it Venus leaving the sign of her domicile, but it's also Venus entering the sign of her detriment. So those things get a little bit harder, a little bit further away, and a little bit more difficult to do with ease because Scorpio is Mars's sign. So it is a sign of pressure, it is a sign of conflict, it is a sign of action and energy. And Venus likes to take it easy. Venus likes to relax. Venus isn't necessarily wanting to be on the battlefields that Mars is placing her on. And so, what do you do when the goddess of love is now on the battlefield, right? She's not going to feel very comfortable there, and it's going to be a lot harder for her to relax, to enjoy, to bring pleasure and delight into our experience. So you can expect for some of those things to get a little bit harder during Venus in Scorpio. Venus in Scorpio is very protective over her heart and her desires. She's not as open and flirty and fun as we see in Venus when Venus is in Libra. I think Austin Coppock says that this is like the goth version of Venus, which I just love. I think it's incredibly accurate. This is Venus who's a little bit more concerned with what's cool, what's edgy, rather than like what's fun, what's flirty, and what's enjoyable for everyone, right? This Venus is a little bit more distrusting of other people, a little bit less open, a lot more protective and defensive as well, which can make it harder to be vulnerable, especially if trust is betrayed. Now, this Venus is also really good at fighting for what is sacred and going into the depths of the Scorpio part of our chart and trying to bring some element of repair there, because even if Venus is in detriment in Scorpio, she's also moving through this sign right after Mars. And it's almost like we have this planet trying to come in and do a little bit of cleanup for what Mars kind of activated during that time there to bring a little bit of a balm in. I think of Venus in Mars's signs as being a nurse on the battlefield. And it's almost like the war, the battle is over. And now Venus is coming in and trying to make things feel okay again, feel nice again. And she might not have a ton of resources to be able to do that in a way that feels super good for us, but it's still a benefic. She's still moving through our, Scorpio part of our chart, and that should bring a much different energy than we've seen, in particular with Mercury and Mars moving through that part of the sign. I don't know about you guys, but during that Moon Mercury Mars conjunction in Scorpio, me and the people around me were not having a great time. So I'm happy to have at least a little bit of a benefic influence moving through that part of the sign. We get a little bit of dignity for Venus when she moves through her own bounds from November 12th to November 15th. So you can expect there to be a little bit more ease during that time. And then she also moves through her own decan from November 22nd all the way up until the end of that transit. I think in general, Venus in Scorpio is a time to discover what is beautiful about what's ugly, what is beautiful about what's real and carnal and hard to look at, and trying to find some pleasure, some enjoyment in that, right? This is like enjoying watching a horror film or, finding something really beautiful about something that's hard to watch or hard to look at, looking at a piece of art that maybe is a little bit gross to you, but still appreciating it and finding a way to immerse yourself in the meaning and in the value of what that artist has brought to the table. So that's a little bit on Venus and Scorpio. I would say, there's going to be a little bit of a different energy of that transit once Mercury retrogrades back into Scorpio, because we're not done with that transit either, but that comes a little bit later in the month. We have a couple other things that happened before then. One on November 8th, which is pretty notable, which is that Uranus is going to leave Gemini and re-enter Taurus during this retrograde that he is currently going through. So this is going to give us a break from the Uranus and Gemini transit, which really sets the mind alight. Mercury is a planet that is very involved in thinking, in communication, and having Uranus in one of those signs, it can really put almost like this mental frenzy energy on the table where you're just talking all the time, you're having ideas, especially if you've got early degree mutable placements. And while that can feel exciting, it can also feel like being attached to a live wire in a way that you wish you could turn off and just aren't able to. So this is going to provide a little bit of a change of pace for that and a break for people who have early degree mutable placements. We're going to revisit the story, of course, when Uranus moves back into Gemini, but that is not going to happen this year. So, this is going to be also very significant for people who have late degree fixed sign placements because this means Uranus is going back to aspect those planets and to change things up. Uranus is a planet of rebellion and revolution. He's a change maker, he's an arsonist. He wants to shake and rattle whatever the status quo is so that it lands in a very different place than where we started. We've been doing Uranus and Taurus since 2018. This isn't a new story, but whatever you thought was solid in the Taurus part of your chart, you're like, wow, I've gone through so much change since 2018. I've done it. I'm on the other side. Hate to break it to you, but you're not. Uranus and Taurus is going to come back for one last kind of shakeup, and there's going to be some reworking about what we are rooted into, about what we find comfortable, what we find pleasurable, what we find stable, and really thinking about the ways that our new reality at this current moment in time has to make space for those types of shifts. The less frantic mental energy is definitely supportive, but I know that Venus's sign is always going to bring us back to the theme of relationships. And so Uranus and Taurus can definitely bring some instability into our connections and our commitments to really anything, not just other people, but also our relationship to the land, our relationship to place, our relationship to our values and our jobs, and the things that bring us a sense of material and tangible security. And, for some parts of this transit in a greater context have really aligned with shifts in agriculture and the availability of food. And hopefully, we're not going to see anything like that this time around. But, there could be some shifts in how stable that type of stuff feels as well. Think about the house that Taurus occupies for you, right? We get that full moon, which is really going to bring up some of the things that you are not anticipating or haven't been able to put your finger on November 5th. And then on November 8th, we're going to have Uranus go back in, and it's almost like the full moon sets the stage for Uranus's re-entry into Taurus. And it's like, whoa, I didn't realize all of this stuff was lurking under the surface that needs to be addressed in my relationships and my connections and my creations. And then Uranus gives you that kind of impetus to be like, you know what, I've got to change something because the time is now. And that will be especially pronounced for anybody, like I said, who has late degree Taurus, Aquarius, Scorpio, or Leo placements, because this is going to be activating those by square or opposition or conjunction. And those are going to be the most intense aspects. All right. So on November 9th, we're going to have Mercury stationing retrograde at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. Remember when I said that there was going to be a break for early degree mutable placements because Uranus is leaving Gemini? I lied because here comes Mercury and Mars. It's a different kind of break, right? It's a break from a little bit of the chaos that Uranus brings to the table, but we are definitely running head first into some conflict with Mercury and Mars conjoining in the early degrees of Sagittarius. Now, Mercury is currently in detriment. So, this first part of the retrograde is going to feel a lot more difficult than the second part of the retrograde when Mercury moves back into Scorpio. This first part of the transit, it's going to feel like Mercury is a little bit under-resourced, a little bit incapable of helping us understand what this story is all about. And Mars is right there with Mercury inflaming the whole situation, which is not super pleasant. I think of Mercury and Mars conjunctions as kind of setting the mind on fire, and that rarely feels super enjoyable or pleasant. You can see right here, if you're watching the video version, that we have Mercury stationing retrograde at 6 degrees. Mars is going to be at 4 degrees. They're going to be in a very, very tight, mutually applying conjunction with one another, and that is going to feel pretty intense. Now, because of this, Mercury retrogrades usually aren't the ideal time to buy anything important, to be signing contracts. And Mars is going to be putting this heat and pressure on Mercury that might make it feel unavoidable, right? Where it's like, but I just have to do this now. So I'm just going to do it. And then you spend the entire retrograde dealing with delays or difficulties or reworkings and revisions of whatever it was that you committed to when Mars was applying that pressure to Mercury in the early kind of, mid range of November when this starts getting really intense because we're going to be kind of doing this. Mercury Mars conjunction for a couple of days, doesn't start separating until November 13th. So we're really going to be feeling the heat of that and then still dealing with the ramifications of it until Mercury stations direct and revisits all of these degrees and passes this first couple degrees of Sagittarius where this conjunction is going direct. Now, Mercury in Sagittarius, especially this first decan of Sagittarius, is a little bit of like I think of it as like a silly Billy energy. It's kind of like, it's like loves to clown, it loves to play, it's very adventurous, it's very um, concerned with myth and meaning and magic, and it wants to have a good time, right? And this is a decan that Mercury co-rules. So even though Mercury is in detriment and maybe doesn't feel as resourced and supported in Sagittarius as a whole, this one subsection of Sagittarius is actually a part that Mercury feels a little bit more comfortable in. But I was thinking about this like Mercury, Mars retrograde situation, and it kind of was making me think of like a jackass stunt gone wrong. It's like you're doing it for the plot, you're doing it for like a prank, and then something goes awry and Mars comes in and someone gets hurt, or something just veers totally off course. Because don't forget, these planets are also in that sign-based square with Saturn, where we are going to be having a little bit of consequences for moving too quickly. So be very mindful, of what you are committing to during this time, any type of risk-taking behaviors, and go really easy on yourself if you are prone to overthinking, because this Mercury-Mars conjunction can certainly ramp that up to a place that it feels pretty uncomfortable. I am also really curious with this conjunction how it's going to bring up some of what we saw when Mercury and Mars conjoined in Scorpio, because this is the second conjunction that we're getting. They conjoined around like 18, 19 degrees of Scorpio. And now on around November 10th, we have the sun transiting those same degrees as this Mercury-Mars conjunction is applying to one another. And during the Mercury Mars conjunction was when we had the Louvre get robbed. And I'm really wondering if there's like a next step in that story that shows up around this time. Like, are the thieves going to be caught or something like that? But it will be interesting to see how that plays out. In our personal lives, you can think about this as being a revisiting of some of the things that came up around this time. And in particular, it's a realization of like, oh, I have to go back and do something again now that Mercury is retrograde, which is likely going to feel very frustrating, right? Mars makes this feel pokey and uncomfortable, and it can really manifest as verbal altercations in particular. And so remember that one, we're revisiting what happened during the Mercury Mars conjunction in Scorpio in October. And two, you're gonna revisit this again too. So these storylines are all connected. And that means that something is playing out over the span of 2 months, roughly, where whatever you say is going to come back around. So you want to be really mindful of how you're phrasing things, like I said before, because this can manifest as direct styles of communication, vulgar altercations, and having a little bit more of a willingness to just say what you think, even if it creates conflict, even if it manifests as an argument, and then potentially regretting that down the line when Mercury stations direct and moves back over these things. Like this looks like fighting about politics. Especially in Sagittarius, where we're concerned with our beliefs, and that can be a really good thing to put your ideas out there and to put your opinions out there and just make sure you're doing it in a way that is safe, right? We don't necessarily want any harm coming because we are vocalizing our opinions, and only so much of that is under our control. But this can definitely show up as being a little bit more difficult, and we just want to make sure everyone is as safe as possible. So that is a little bit about the Mercury-Mars conjunction, which goes exact on the 12th. They're going to conjoin. If we just move this up towards like US time zones, you'll see that they will conjoin. And that is going to be that transit. So now moving backwards a day, on November 11th, Jupiter is going to station retrograde at 25 degrees of Cancer. So remember when I said that there's a lot of planets that are stationing retrograde or stationing direct or moving into a different sign. It's like a lot of things are shifting. Our relationships to them are changing. We're going to be moving backwards, then we're moving forwards, and then we're revisiting a whole new storyline with Uranus going back into Taurus. And Jupiter has been flying through Cancer, right? Jupiter entered Cancer on June 9th and is already at 25 degrees, right? Really, really just, I felt like that part of the transit went so quickly, and even if it always does, it just still feels like, whoa, what do you mean? Jupiter was just in like the first decan of Cancer, and now we have Jupiter stationing retrograde in the final decan of Cancer. And so if you've been feeling like, oh my God, the Jupiter in Cancer transit is almost over, fret not. We still get quite a bit more of Jupiter in Cancer. It's going to go a lot slower from here on out and is going to move into Leo on June 30th of next year. So we still have quite a bit of time of Jupiter in his exaltation, but this does mark a redirection of our energy and our efforts and of what is being brought into a greater sphere of focus in the Cancer part of our charts. Now, if you have a day chart, this transit should hopefully be bringing you a little bit more ease in that area of life, right? So if this is in your 10th house, I know someone who got a promotion, for example, right? It's like those types of blessings and boons that Jupiter wants to bring to the table. Sometimes it can feel like you are being asked to take a leap of faith, but Jupiter is also just trying to nourish and nurture that area of life, but sometimes expansion and even blessings and good things can feel challenging to accept or receive. If you haven't listened to the 11th house episode I did with Meg Kane, we talk about that kind of sensation that Jupiter brings of it's a benefic, but what about when it doesn't feel so benefic? So if that's you with this Jupiter and Cancer transit, I would definitely recommend checking that episode out and also taking note of the fact of if you have a night chart, Jupiter is not going to be the planet that is bringing you all of the wins and all of the successes and all of the blessings that you're seeking. So it might not feel like all of these things are just going super, super well for you in the Cancer area of life, or that it's automatically all better. But I have seen, at least in the lives of family and friends and clients, that Jupiter in Cancer has been definitely bringing some ease into that area of life, which is a relief because we could all use just a little bit more ease right now. So take stock of the blessings that have shown up and the disappointments because this transit is ever fluctuating, right? You are going to get a very different version of Jupiter in Cancer every single day, depending on where the moon is in the sky and what the moon is doing, right? If the moon is in Capricorn or Scorpio, this transit, Jupiter in Cancer, and be like, what is Jupiter even doing, right? Because the planet that Jupiter is relying on to deliver on the promise of exaltation is not resourced and can't necessarily provide what Jupiter needs to be able to do that. So, this transit is one that changes every single day and might feel really benefic and really beautiful some days and disappointing others because that is the nature of exaltation when the domicile lord isn't in a place where they can deliver on the exaltation promises. I have a whole lecture on that if you want to go deeper with exaltation and how sometimes it just doesn't stack up to our expectations of it because a planet in exaltation has very high expectations, right? Jupiter expects to be taken care of, to be received as almost this like VIP guest, right? And so when Jupiter entered Cancer, on top of it just being a transit that we are hopeful about, you might have high expectations of the Cancer part of your chart and you might be getting closer to accomplishing those things, but it still might feel like you're falling short sometimes because of how high those expectations are and because of the fact that it's constantly shifting and our ability to tap into this resourcedness of the exaltation shifts and morphs regularly, right? And so now that Jupiter is stationing retrograde, it is really going to activate cardinal placements from 22 degrees to 28 degrees of Cancer and start really have you digging into what does make you feel safe, what makes you feel secure, what blessings do you have, what are your beliefs, what are you happy about and optimistic about, and what are you not, right? I think this retrograde is a question of how can we make some of the good things that have come out of this transit last? And then how do we also accept that it won't, right? This transit changes the Cancer part of our chart. And this retrograde is a little bit more about reviewing, slowing down from this very fast pace that Jupiter has been moving at, and really taking stock of what has come about as a result and what still needs to change for us to get to a place where we do feel comfortable and connected and secure in that area of life, because those are ultimately the main things that Cancer is concerned with as a sign. Now, eventually, we're going to be seeing Jupiter move from Cancer 3, the final decan of Cancer, to Cancer 2. And that is a story of moving from abundance to protection. So it really feels like we are trying to savor what has come about in Cancer and find ways that we can nurture that thing so that it sticks around, so that it thrives, so that it flourishes. And this first kind of retrograde station is going to be a big shift in the overall Jupiter and Cancer transit. So take note of what comes up around November 11th, because that is really going to be almost like a stake in the ground of the Jupiter and Cancer transit as a whole, and really help you see where things are starting to shift, where you need to repair, where you need to review, and where you need to really reorient yourself to be able to kind of make the most of what some of this transit can promise you. Okay. Now, on November 19th, we're going to have Mercury re-enter Scorpio. So, as we said, Mercury moved into Sagittarius, stationed retrograde, conjoined Mars, and is now re-entering Scorpio to finish up business there. This is going to continue the Mercury retrograde storyline, but it's bridging the gap between Sagittarius and Scorpio. So, this is not just a revision and a review of the Sagittarius part of your life, but the Sagittarius and the Scorpio part of your life, and how those two things are intimately connected, right? This can be, let's say, it's the fifth house and the fourth house for you, or Sag is the fifth and Scorpio is the fourth. This might be realizing how you parent and how your children influence the family dynamic at home, influence your living space, right? And thinking about ways that you can change up how you are approaching those dynamics with your kids, so that also has an influence on how you are approaching the home and family and living situation as a whole. So it bridges those two house topics together, and it is going to ask you to take stock of both and how they are informing one another. How does what was unearthed in Sagittarius tie back into what's going on here? That's a really good question to start asking yourself around November 19th and in the days to follow. Things are also going to become a little bit more covert again, a little bit more stealthy, a little bit more sensitive, because we are moving from that diurnal sign into a nocturnal sign, right? So it becomes a little bit more focused on the internal world, on our emotions, on our relationships, and on the things that happen under the cover of night, right? This is a little bit of a change from the let me just say it, let me just do it kind of energy. And we start plotting secretly, collecting the receipts, collecting the data points, and keeping them for when we need them in the future. And so that is going to be Mercury's re entry into Scorpio. Now, on the 20th, we get a very interesting new moon in Scorpio as well, which just so happens to take place during a Mercury cazimi. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys so we can talk about this new moon, because there is a lot going on here. We have, as you can see, it happens at 28 degrees of Scorpio, and it happens while Mercury is conjoining the heart of the sun. Now, in addition to all of that, it is now opposing Uranus and Taurus, who is freshly ingressed into that sign, right? So we're not doing placements entering 1 degree or 0 degrees of mutable signs getting that hit from Uranus, but more so the later degree fixed signs are now activated by Uranus's re entry into Taurus. And so there's a couple things that I think are really interesting about this new moon. One is that any new moon is going to mark kind of a seeding point in that part of your chart, right? The Scorpio part of your life, we have gone through some revisions with Mercury retrograde. We've gone through a lot of activation with Mars moving through there, maybe a little bit more productive and constructive for night charts and a little bit more challenging for those of us with day charts, right? Really ripping through there and considering how we want to pour our energy and our time and our passion into that area of life and how much progress we can make when we do. And now it's almost like there's this seeding point where we are turning a page in the Scorpio part of our chart with this new moon, but we're also gaining a lot of clarity as we do because of the Mercury cazimi. And if you're unfamiliar with what a cazimi is, it happens when a planet gets within 1 degree of the sun. In the Hellenistic tradition, the medieval sources say 16 to 17 minutes. I personally use a 1 degree orb and have found that that very much holds up. Um, and so it's almost like when a planet conjoins the heart of the sun, they are brought into the sun's embrace. They are protected from their proximity to the sun and they are illuminated, right? Their properties glow and shine. A lot of the metaphors that are used in ancient texts are it's like the planet is sitting in the king's lap and they can ask the king for favors. And the king is like, yes, sure, I would be happy to provide that for you. So now Mercury is not just in the throne room, but is in the king's lap and is getting favors and is getting kind of special treatment. Right. So when a Mercury goes cazimi, which does happen pretty regularly, this isn't like a rare transit by any stretch of the imagination. However, a new moon Mercury cazimi is a lot more rare. It tends to be a time where we gain mental clarity, right? And it happens every time Mercury goes retrograde. And normally that clarity is connected to that retrograde cycle. So this questioning over how things are changing in Sagittarius and Scorpio and how we are bridging those two houses together and the review and the analysis that we've been doing in those areas of life, it starts to make a little bit of sense during this Mercury cazimi, and it allows us to plant new seeds to make change in the Scorpio part of our chart. But this is still a new moon, so it's still quieter, although Uranus is going to add a little bit of a different flavor to things. But it feels, I think, tiresome or laborsome because this is still Scorpio. The moon is in fall in Scorpio, right? So she is not super resourced here. These planets can't see Mars, who is in charge of all of them. So they don't have resources coming in, and the moon is definitely hurting a little bit more. And so it feels like you're working for the insight and the new beginning that is being seeded during this time. So I would recommend doing the Scorpio approach and getting quiet, getting still, and really considering what information arises when you do, rather than trying to burst through the door and figure something out with brute force. This is a little bit more of like a take it slow, rest. Laying in bed, and all of a sudden you have like an epiphany. Like that's kind of the energy of this a little bit more, in my opinion. And the opposition to Uranus challenges some of that, right? Because Uranus is not a lay in bed kind of planet. Uranus is the lightning strike that causes us to get up, to take action, to go out into the world, to fight for something, to change something, right? It is not like a rest on your laurels kind of planet. And that is going to make it feel probably pressurizing to make some changes in the Scorpio part of your chart, right? And that is stimulated by this desire to change ingrained behaviors, to allow stagnated emotions to move and to flow. But there is mental clarity that arises with it, which I think is kind of the silver lining of this new moon, in addition to the fact that we also have Jupiter trining all of these planets, and we have Venus co-present. So there is a lot of benefic influence here that I do think adds a lot of support and cushioning to this area of your life. Scorpio has been really getting hit, as you've noticed from the October forecast and this forecast, that there's a lot going on in that area of your life, right? And here we can see that something is really beginning to shift. and that you are able to bring a new kind of energy to this area of life, and that that's ushered in and supported by Venus's presence here. So make sure you get still, make sure you get quiet, because this is Scorpio, but it's also a new moon. So there's not a lot of light, there's not a lot of visibility, but there is still the planet of thinking and communication being highlighted by the cazimi that allows you to gain some clarity over what is going on. This almost feels like it's a sense of inner knowing versus external telling. Like this isn't having a conversation with someone and then have this spark of, oh, that's what I need to do, or this is where I need to go. This is like an internal moment of awareness where it's like, like now I know because I wasn't engaged in external chatter, but I really had the time to think about what I want, what my desires are, what I feel passionate about, and what I want to build and craft and create in the Scorpio part of my chart that I know now where I need to go. And, having a little bit of the audacity to make some of those changes with Uranus, really kind of putting some pressure on this to be like, all right, let's go, go, go. Let's do the thing. Let's make the change. So that is the new moon that we experience on November 20th. Like I said, it's pretty intense. I'm kind of oddly looking forward to it. And I never say that about a Scorpio moon transit. So we'll see what happens when we get there. All right. On November 22nd, we have the sun entering Sagittarius, which is just hee hee ha ha. We love her. I love Sag season personally. I feel like the shift from Scorpio to Sag season is so felt, right? It is like getting out of this serious, plotting, intense, protective, secretive, um, action-oriented energy and moving into a place where it's like, okay, we're a little bit more hopeful, we're a little bit more optimistic, we're focused on, being a little bit more social because this is a diurnal sign, it's Jupiter's sign, it's a little bit more connective rather than protective. And I feel like it's kind of like the moment where you come above water and you can breathe and see the sun again after swimming really deep below in the trenches. And I think that is going to be a nice breath of relief for a lot of people to be able to have that transition take place. It's also bringing some fire into a very watery sky. At this time, prior to this, we only have Mars in a fire sign. We have no planets in air signs, at least no traditional planets. Pluto is in Aquarius. But other than that, it's a very watery time, which can feel very almost it feels like a very internal experience. We're very connected to our emotions, or we're asked to be more connected to our emotions. It's about going with the flow and accepting a little bit more of this ooh kind of pace. If you're watching the video version, you saw the motion that I did with that, right? It is a little bit different than what you heard on the audio version. But fire energy in the sky is like, okay, let's do something about this, right? It is about taking action. It's about being social. It's about getting out into the world. And it gives us a little bit more of a oomph, where in water signs, we kind of lack that oomph a lot of the time. It's a lot more underground, and now we are going above ground. And I think that is going to feel like a little bit of a relief, at least for me, who's a very air fire person in my own chart. I'm always happy when we get more planets and air and fire signs in the sky because doing all of this water has been a lot of feeling. And while feeling is great and lovely and beautiful, I'm ready to get some stuff done. And this ingress of the sun into Sagittarius is certainly going to help. In particular, because it is going to mean that the Sun and Mars are now co-present. They're going to both be moving through Sagittarius. And this is going to highlight their dynamic, right, as a planetary pairing. And the things that the Sun and Mars can agree on or have in common are risk-taking behavior, on courage, on confidence, being really ambitious, going after your goals. They both have a drive to them, right? Mars is going to amplify up. Um, I wouldn't say the sun is a cautious planet necessarily, but Mars definitely makes it a little bit more. Let's take a risk. Let's go after the thing. This is the vision. This is the goal. This is the ideal. We're going to go after it, and we're going to do something about it. And Mars kind of energizes the sun. The sun is going to energize Mars, and we can fight for our vision. We can really strive to be in charge. This can be a time where we feel a little bit more comfortable taking on leadership roles, but it can also be a time where you start seeing things as like my way byway or the highway, right? The sun is the self. So whatever part of Sagittarius this it occupies in your chart, this is going to be where you are starting to feel like, no, but I know the way that I want to do things. I know the way that I want to get things done. And if it is a relational part of your chart, that could potentially bring up some conflict because Mars is the planet of conflict and the sun is the self, right? So if this is in the third or the seventh or the 11th houses, you want to be mindful of not going too far into this like overzealous, I know everything and my way is the right way energy, because that is definitely one of the ways that the sun and Mars, when they are combined, especially in a Jupiter ruled sign, which is going to add a lot more enthusiasm to the mix, can manifest, right? So, Venus is going to join the party in a little bit, and that is going to kick off like this Venus Sun Mars co-presence thing that we are going to be doing for a long time. They actually are going to all merge in Capricorn, where we get this dual Venus Mars cazimi thing. And so we'll talk about that. That happens at the end of the month on November 30th when Venus enters Sagittarius. But I mention that now because the Sun and Mars are almost starting to have that conversation before Venus joins the party, right? So it's going to feel a little bit more heated, a little bit more inflammatory, and a little bit less careful, desirable, enjoyable while Venus is not there. So just to say that there is something coming that softens this a little bit, but we are not in the soft part right now from the 22nd to the 30th. This is going to be nice for people who are in a Leo perfection year because this means the sun is moving out of Scorpio, where he does not have much dignity besides for that decan, and into Sagittarius, where he has some triplicity dignity. So if you are in a Leo perfection, you can look forward to this ingress as bringing a little bit more ease. And is this also just going to bring a lot more focus onto the Sagittarius part of your chart while starting to kind of ease off of the intensity of how much Scorpio stuff we've been doing, which we've been doing for a while at this point. Now, on November 25th, Mercury and Venus are going to conjoin in Scorpio. And this is, cry your heart out, eat your heart out, profess your love to your diary or to another person, write a moody song, share poetry, make a playlist, right? I love Mercury Venus conjunctions for bringing about the ability to convey information about artistry, about creativity, about connection and relationship. And in Scorpio, it takes on a much moodier kind of like dark soul, tortured poet, energy. And this feels like really, really ripe for leaning into a bit more of an emotionally expressive form of artistry. Like she's a cute conjunction, but she's goth, she's dark, she's tortured. So allow that to be how you express at this time. It might feel like you're overly sensitive, and I don't say overly as meaning actually overly sensitive, but in terms of your usual level of sensitivity, this Mercury Venus conjunction can heighten that, right? I think of Scorpio as being one of the most sensitive signs. They present as very calm, cool, collected as the scorpion with the armor and the weapon built in, but underneath that armor is a very, very sensitive underbelly. And that sensitivity can really show up when we have a Mercury Venus conjunction, which tends to get us talking about our feelings, especially in a sign where that's not usually the standard mode of operating. And sometimes it's going to feel like kind of keeping that in, but finding creative or artistic ways to express those emotions. This one's for the yearners, so enjoy. And then on November 28th, Saturn is going to station direct in Pisces, which honestly, thank goodness, right? Like let's be done with the Saturn and Pisces transit. As a Saturn and Pisces native myself, I'm like, I'm ready for this one to be over. But it also adds to the same energy that I was talking about before, where we've got a lot of these planets stationing retrograde, stationing direct, moving into different signs, right? So we've had Mercury station retrograde, Uranus regress into Taurus. We've had Jupiter station retrograde, and now we have Saturn stationing direct. This is really interesting because it happens at a time where Jupiter and Saturn are both at 25 degrees. And if you're not looking at the arc minutes, you might be like, we get this like Jupiter Saturn trine, and they're completing the trine, and this is going to be really, really beautiful. But they actually don't. If you look at the arc minutes, we don't quite get there. And this feels like the biggest almost, right? It's like I almost had all of the pieces put in place, right? I found the way to harmonize between the Cancer part of my chart and the Pisces part of my chart, and it felt so good. And then, wait, something came up, and I'm realizing that the foundations that I was creating there were not flowing in the way that I needed them to, or are not providing as much support and are going to have to be revisited once again. That trine actually does not complete until mid Aries and Leo. So much further into 2026. But on a happier note, this is Saturn changing direction in Pisces, moving past those last couple degrees and starting to look ahead to re enter Aries, which happens on February 13th of next year. So, this is going to feel like we are really in the final leg of this transit. Whatever has been under construction in the Pisces part of your chart since March of 2023, this is almost like Saturn's last dash of being like, okay, I really need to get these foundations in place because I'm not coming back here for another 28, 29 years. And because of that, it's going to probably feel like an intensifier in the Pisces part of your chart, right? You're going to want to make sure that everything feels really solid and sturdy there. But it might also feel a little overwhelming because we do have Mars approaching that square with Saturn, getting closer and closer, right? And this can make it feel like this intensity around the reconstruction of Pisces, right? Around everything that you've been building up there. And Mars is like, okay, we really don't have a lot of time left to do that. And Saturn kind of feeling the weight of that pressure, the weight of that square, because Mars is in the overcoming position. So Mars has a little bit more of the ability to kind of beat up on Saturn at this time. And that can make it feel a little bit harder and a little bit more complicated for Saturn to do his job. So I think this is a really great moment to take stock of everything that's changed in the Pisces part of your chart and in your life over the last couple of years, and think about where you were then, where you are now, where you want to be, and what you need to do and accomplish to bridge that gap. And think about, if I wasn't going to spend as much time and intensity on this area of my life for another 30 years, what would I really want to make sure I got done right now? And then remind yourself that you have a couple of months left to do that. You don't need to do it tomorrow, which is what Mars is going to be telling you. You have until February 13th, and just start putting kind of like an action plan in place. I think Mars and Saturn can really get on board with being like, okay, this is all the shit that needs to get done. Let's make a to-do list and let's start building and let's start, moving towards those goals, right? They both are planets that agree on toil. So it's like, oh, we're going to put work and effort into something. Great. Sign me up. So give them a job to do, but also remind yourself that you're probably having a lot of things going on in other areas of your life as well, and that you don't need to have all of the answers right away. You got a couple more months left for Saturn to finish up business in that part of our lives. I would also consider what was happening early this year when we had the retrogrades of Mercury and Venus and the conjunction with the North Node and Saturn all happening in these final degrees of Pisces, because you might be seeing some whispers of that storyline also coming back at this time. We had Venus and Saturn conjoin at roughly 26 degrees of Pisces when Venus was direct on April 22nd. So think about what was going on around that time in your life, because this is going to be some reconstruction. We're revisiting some of those topics as well. And that is going to feel, potentially like a time where you're able to create a solid, sturdy foundation for some of the things that arose during those double retrogrades that we experienced earlier in the year. Now that Saturn is direct, is also going to be applying to Neptune and Pisces. So this is going to intensify their dynamic with one another, because it's not like Saturn's turned the other way and Neptune's tapping Saturn on the shoulder. Now they are just like right there, right next to each other. So all of the Saturn Neptune themes that have been so present and that everyone's been talking about for a while are going to start ramping up again, right? Saturn is reality and Neptune is a little bit more about the fantasy. And this can feel like a blurring of reality, an inability to discern what is fact and what is fiction. It can also give you a little bit more of this rose-colored glasses perspective on everything that still needs to be done in Pisces, where it's like, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We got it, or confusion, because I think of Neptune as like a great fog, right? It's like you're walking your way through this foggy forest and you can't see anything. And all you can kind of do is go onto your hands and your knees and feel your way through, right? Neptune makes it harder to see things clearly. And Saturn wants nothing more than to be able to see things clearly so we can build that solid foundation, right? It's like, how do you know where you're laying each piece of brick or concrete if you're doing it in fog, right? It's going to be a lot harder to do that. And Neptune is going to make that process a little bit more difficult for Saturn. So there can be some questioning around what have I even accomplished in Pisces over the past couple of years? Like, what else do I need to do? Right. And what I would say is lean into Neptune's more creative, mystical, intuitive properties, right? And maybe not writing a list of everything that you've done, but maybe feeling into it a little bit more, taking a bit more of that like Piscean approach instead of like the tactical pros and cons list of all that's been done and all that still needs to be done and how you feel about it and what's good and what's bad about it. But maybe just feel into it, right? Like if Pisces is your 11th house, like how does it feel to be in relation with a large group of people? How does your community feel to you? And how is that feeling different from what it felt like a couple of years ago? Are you proud of where that's gone? Or is it harder now? Is Saturn bringing a heaviness, right? Has Saturn kind of sobered you up around those themes? Or is it something that feels like there is a possibility of building something really strong and lasting? And that even if you're not quite sure how you're going to get there yet, that you can feel into the fact that it's something that you've made a lot of progress around, right? And always keeping in mind that Saturn's going to be a lot more difficult if you have a night chart. So if you are a night chart, it might not feel like I've made a lot of progress here. It might just feel like, wow, this has gotten really hard and I'm not really sure how to move forward. And that's okay too. You don't have to have all the answers, and Neptune is certainly going to obscure some of them. So keep in mind that even though Saturn is really in kind of like that last sprint mode to tie up all of the loose ends there, that Neptune is going to add a bit of a haziness to accomplishing that. All right, that's Saturn's direct station at 25 degrees. That is also an intensifier for anyone who has mutable placements, right? So if you've got placements around 22 to 28 degrees of Sagittarius, Virgo, Gemini, or Pisces, this can feel like a pressurizing time, right? Saturn adds like this weight of expectation. And so if you've got planets or placements around those degrees, then it can feel like a time of, wow, this feels really hard. This feels really heavy. I'm really sad about this, right? Saturn is just a planet of melancholy, you know? And so sometimes it can make those things feel a little tougher, and just go easy on yourself, go easy on others. Sometimes again, especially for night charts, those activations are not the easiest ones to get through, but we get through them always, and we'll get through this one too. On November 29th, Mercury stations direct. Hooray. We love her. This should kind of start to flip the switch on a lot of these standard Mercury retrograde significations that are not always so pleasant to deal with, like having tech issues or, having to revisit documents or traffic or travel delays. So that should start to feel a little bit easier. Mercury stationing at 20 degrees of Scorpio, so that will kind of ping anyone who has fixed degree placements around 20 degrees. And if you are in a Mercury perfection year, a Gemini or Virgo perfection year, things should start to feel a lot easier after this date. But just remember that with any retrograde station, which is also relevant to Saturn, right? Also relevant to Jupiter, anytime a planet stations retrograde or direct, it's not like a light switch goes and they're like zooming off in a new direction, right? It's like they've slowly turned around and now they're kind of rolling into or rolling out of the retrograde. And that is going to take some time to get used to, right? Mercury's going to hang out around this degree for a while. So it's going to take a little bit of time before we really start seeing things move forward again. And that's okay, you know? but we can rejoice, fellow Mercurials, because rebrand season is over. I would say for Gemini and Virgo risings, I feel like anytime Mercury is retrograde, it's like I need a personal rebrand, and then Mercury stations direct, and it's like, okay, that pressure to change and update this current version of myself is a little bit less intense now. And then we close out the month on November 30th with Venus entering Sagittarius. This is Venus leaving the sign of her detriment. So it should be a weight off all of our shoulders. It should make relational stuff, creative stuff, artistic stuff, all of that feel a lot easier, a lot less heavy in the way that we were talking about with Venus feeling very protective in Scorpio and a lot less willing to be vulnerable. That's going to get easier when Venus moves into Sagittarius. She's peregrine, which means she doesn't have dignity or debility. She's not in detriment, but she's not in domicile, sort of thing. But whatever, man. Like I'll take Venus and Sag over Venus and Scorpio in terms of just like the day-to-day experience, not necessarily the person. I have a thing for Venus and Scorpio people. But Venus and Sagittarius should feel like a little bit more of a light-hearted energy. This is also bringing that Sun, Venus, Mars co-presence together, right? That is really going to heighten when they all enter Capricorn, like I talked about before. But Sun, Venus, Mars stuff can really make us willing to risk it all for what we love and who we love and what we desire, right? It can be really great for taking creative risks. Like if you feel like you're in a rut and you want to try something new, this Venus, Sun, Mars thing is going to be really supportive for that, especially if you're, you know, like you've got this in a creative house, like in the fifth house or something. It can also be really helpful for being bold about what you want, for professing your desires, and becoming known or visible for things that are related to the Venus Mars archetype, which is being charming, being seductive, right? We could see some like fun fashion trends emerging. That's like, whoa, what is that kind of thing? I always think of that as like bold fashion choices that really make you look, right? That's like a Venus, Sun, Mars thing. So it could be fun for a little like a risky fashion moment. But in terms of how this is going to be impacting your personal chart, right, this is going to add a little bit of ease and a little bit of support for some of that Sun Mars intensity that's been going on in Sagittarius. So if it's felt really hot and dry there, and just like you're kind of grading, grading against the grain with the Sun Mars, Venus is going to add a little bit of softening to that dynamic, a little bit more relationality, a little bit more willingness to compromise, to think about the other. And, this is a benefic and a malefic in the same sign. So you're going to be getting a bit of a mixed bag in this area of life where there's going to be some stuff that's really hard because Mars is there, especially for day charts, and some stuff that feels really great because Venus is there, especially for night charts, because these are both nocturnal planets. It's going to be a little bit easier for people who are born after the sun has set. So you and me, day charts, we are in this together. Um, but that Venus is still going to ease up some of Mars's maleficence, which is going to help feel a little bit, yeah, a little bit easier in the Sag parts of our lives. So I'm really looking forward to Venus's entry into Sagittarius. This big Sagittarius stellium is really going to make us want to consider what it is and who it is that we believe in, who we champion, who we fight for, and how our beliefs inform our behavior with Mars there, how our values are something that really are what we are known for these days, right? And how that can cause conflict and dissension with Mars there, but how sometimes generative conflict is necessary, right? I feel like this is a really great opportunity to fight for what you believe in and to do so with the other person in mind and to take some consideration of that with Venus being present. But think about whatever house this occupies for you and realize that there's going to be some difficulty present because of Mars and also some blessings because of Venus there, and that it can be a time where you can have both and, right? Where you can fight with someone and then make up afterwards and realize that sometimes conflict is good, right? Or where you can fight for someone who cannot fight for themselves, or where you can become known for a Venus Mars archetype, right? Which is often expressing in creative form. So I think this is going to be kind of a nice easing up on some of the intensity of the Scorpio stuff that we've been going through for most of the month, and also some of just that Sun Mars co-presence that hasn't had a lot of softness or sweetness introduced into it. And this is like a little bit of a dash of honey. onto that otherwise, burnt toast that Sun Mars is doing in that part of our lives. But that is everything. I feel like we got through a lot of astrology. Like I said, lots of retrograde and direct stations this month. A lot of things are shifting. So expect for it to feel a little bit like you're moving really quickly and then you're being kind of pulled back and told to slow down and reanalyze things, rework things. That's very much the nature of this month. And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It actually means you are right on time, as always. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you are subscribed, leave a review. It really helps me out and helps ensure that the podcast is going to be around for years to come. If you want to really support the show, go ahead and subscribe to my Patreon page. That is the best way to support me and my work and to enable me to keep doing this. And I would really appreciate it. The link is down below, and I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.